students. Today is our third session in the states of matter. In the previous lesson, we have covered the density, specific heat, latent heat of fusion and vaporization, and we have also seen the phase change diagrams where you have seen that how the heat affects the molecular aspects of the matter. So today's objective of this class is we will see particulate models of the solids, liquids and gases. We'll also see the crystalline versus the amorphous polymers, and we will also see different types of intermolecular forces which are present within the matter at the molecular level. So in these four images are the matter in different states, and we will use the 2D particulate model, which are the simple ways of imagining what is going at the molecular scale inside of the matter. So you can imagine each of these circles either as ions or molecules or atoms, and these models tells us how these molecules are interacting with each other and hence determine the corresponding states of matter. Okay, now think about which quadrant is a solid state, which represents matter in liquid state, and which represents matter in gaseous state. Most of you are able to predict the correct models of solid, liquid, and gas. Now let's dig deep into it. So for example, if you imagine each of these circles to be an ion, you could imagine these to be an ionic solids forming a lattice structure. And for example, if you can imagine these as circles to be an atom, you could imagine those to be forming covalent bonds with the neighboring circles, and then it could be forming the covalent network solids. So if you could imagine these circles as molecules, and due to intermolecular forces they have arranged in this regular way to the other molecules, then you could imagine that this is a molecular solid. So you could also imagine these circles as metal atoms. And they are all sharing the soup of valence electrons, so we are dealing with the metallic solids. But whatever imagination you do it's pretty clear that this is a solid. And one of the major giveaways of that is that not only it is taking the shape of the container, the particles aren't able to fully slide past each other like the solids, and they're clearly not able to overcome the forces between the particles and move around. Hence, the intermolecular forces of attraction is pretty high. Now this one, if you see here, that the particles are taking the shape of the container and they are able to slide past each other, but there are still intermolecular forces and which keep them from flying apart. So this is clearly a liquid. But here you can understand what's going on. These particles, whether they are molecules or ions, they are able to overcome the intermolecular forces between them. So they are just bouncing around the whole container. So this is clearly a gas. Now what about this? It looks like a kind of solid, and it's not taking the shape of the container. But it's also irregular. It's not as compact as we have seen the previous picture. The way that you might expect a liquid to be, at least because it's not taking the shape of the container, and because these molecules or particles are not sliding past each other. So they have some characteristics just like normal solids. So though this is a solid, there is a specific name for this solid. We call it as amorphous solid. And the other one, which has more compact structure, is called a crystalline solid. And whatever specific property of this amorphous solid is it has a very good elastic quality. And there are a lot of examples that we can see in our daily life on the amorphous solid. For example, if you can see here, this is a rubber band. And what's the quality that whenever you take a rubber band and stretch it, it will go back to its original state, right? And the reason why it does that the natural rubber is made up of polymers. And just to imagine that what a polymer is, polymer is, we can see it is a chain of hydrocarbons just like this. It's a picture of the natural rubber. The natural rubber is a hydrocarbon, and where it is the carbons are bonded to hydrogens. So imagine that this is a bunch of strings, and they're all tangled up. And so if you can pull them or stretch them, what will happen? That they get elongated. And what will happen if you let them go or unstretch them? They will get back to their original state. So there are other examples of amorphous solids, just like plastics, you use in day-to-day life. They are also examples of amorphous solids. Now, what is the basic difference between amorphous versus crystalline solid is that amorphous are irregular patterns. They have an irregular patterns of ions or atoms or molecules in a solid, whereas crystalline is a regular, you can see the picture, and repeating arrangement of components or particles in the solid. This amorphous solid have a second physical property that they melt over a range of temperature, whereas the crystalline solid, just like sugars or common salts are examples, they have a very sharp melting point, they have a specific melting point, unlike amorphous solids. And examples of amorphous includes rubber, plastics, and glass. Now, the second subsection of today's lesson is that we'll learn about intermolecular forces. Now, if you take two water molecules, there exists a force between the two water molecules. And there is also a force which exists within a particular water molecule. So, whatever force that exists between the two water molecules, two independent water molecules, we call it as intermolecular forces. And the force which exists within a water molecule, we call it as intramolecular forces. So, we will learn today more about intermolecular, so molecule to molecule force of attraction. Now, why do different liquids, for example, have different boiling points? Yes, you are right, because of the intermolecular force of attraction. Now, these forces can exist between even neutral independent atoms or neutral molecules. Basically, four types of intermolecular forces that we'll learn in today's lesson. They are London dispersion forces, dipole-dipole forces, and hydrogen bonding. So the first intermolecular force that we are going to talk about is London dispersion forces. Let's start with a neutral atom. That is, it has same number of protons and electrons. So it has also an electron cloud. So if you go deep into an atom, how does an atom look? It has a nucleus and the electron cloud is there outside. And similarly, there is a neighboring nucleus or neighboring atom which has also an electron cloud outside it. So how can the two neutral atoms be attracted towards each other? And that's what actually the London dispersion forces actually explain. Now, the first way to think about it is that electrons are constantly jumping around probabilistically. So, it is a probability density cloud where an electron could be anywhere at this moment. And it is not evenly distributed. So, for a moment, it is possible that the electron or the electron positions within the electron cloud are these. And so for a moment, we can think that the electrons are slightly aligned to the left direction here. It results in the formation of slightly negative delta minus charge on the left side of the atom. And hence, there is a slightly positive charge created on the right side of the atom. Now, what this might induce in the neighboring atom? So, if there are different charges across the atom, think about what it will create an effect on the neighboring atom. Pause the video and think about it. Well, we know that the like charges repel and unlike charges attract each other. So if we have a partial positive charge on the right side of the left atom, then the negative electron might be attracted towards in this right atom. this creates a partial positive and negative charge on the neighboring atom as well, right? On the second atom as well. So you can see here that we already had a randomly occurring dipole on the left hand side, but then that would induce a dipole in the right hand side. So dipole is a separation of charge where you have your positive and negative charges at two different parts of a molecule or an atom. So in this case scenario, you can see that these two neutral molecules or atoms starts attracting towards each other, and this attraction happens due to the induced dipoles. That is exactly what the London dispersion force is all about. Now, what can also London dispersion force is also known as the induced induced dipole interaction. These two atoms are attracted towards each other because of temporary imbalance of electrons, okay, and then it induces dipole on the other atom or the molecule, and then it gets attracted. So question to think about is that how strong these forces can be, because these are momentarily, the electrons at this position of the electron cloud can happen at momentarily time, and this creates this delta minus and delta plus charge, which creates or induces a charge on the neighboring atom. So how strong these forces can be, and that's all about the notion of polarizability. How easy is to polarize an atom or a molecule? Generally, the more electrons you have or larger the electron cloud, which is usually associated with the molar mass or the atomic size, the more polarizability you have. For example, if you take the helium atom, which have only 2 electrons on the outermost shell, or as a 2 total electrons, and on the other hand, if you can see here that it has the total number of electrons is here 8. So you can see you have much more significant imbalances. And more imbalances means that we have more polarizability for the right hand side element of the atom, because it has more number of electrons. And more polarizability means it can induce a temporary stronger dipole, which would induce a strong dipole to its neighbor. So we can see here that stronger dipole interaction means higher boiling point. How? So for example, this example we have seen just now about the helium or the atom which have only 2 electrons, and here if it has less dipole interaction, because there is only 2 electrons and hence less imbalances of electrons, so it will have less boiling point. If they are stronger, then there is a intermolecular force of attraction is less, then we need less energy to break these bonds. These are weaker bonds, right? And hence the boiling point will be less. On the other hand, if the dipole interaction is more, for example, if we have 8 electrons, if it is stronger dipole interaction, then we need more energy to break these bonds, and hence it will have higher boiling point. So greater the molar mass, more electrons it has, right? And hence if the electrons is more, then the polarizability is more. It can induce more dipole interaction with the neighboring atom, and hence stronger London dispersion forces, and hence higher boiling point. So we can explain here from this fundamental thing that if the molecular size is bigger or it has higher mass, then it should have higher boiling point. We can explain with the help of London dispersion forces. So let's see a second example. For example, this is N-butane. It has 4 carbon chain, and it is a long carbon chain here. And the second comparison with the N-butane is that we can take of isobutane. So it has also 4 carbon chains. So if you check the molecular formula, it has also C4 and it has also C4, and the number of hydrogens is also same. So what do you think, which one should have a higher boiling point? Which one should have greater London dispersion forces. So because both have the same molar mass here, because both have the molar mass of C4H10. So actually, if you see here the structure, this is much more elongated, right? And this is much more compact. And since it has elongated, the N-butane is elongated structure, it will have more surface area, it will take more space as compared to the isobutane. So what will result in that is that it will have stronger London dispersion forces because it has more surface area, it has more exposure to the electron cloud, right? And hence probabilistically the electron can be momentarily more dispersed and hence create a stronger dipole moment with neighboring atom as compared to the isobutane here in this case. And if the stronger London dispersion forces is there in case of N-butane, that means it has higher boiling point. So what can you conclude? That if the molecule is elongated structure, has an elongated structure, it will have higher boiling point if they have both the same molar mass. Okay, so we can also compare the two molecules with the help of the molecular structure. So to conclude that the structure of the molecule helps us to predict the boiling point of the material. The second intermolecular forces that we'll learn is about dipole-dipole forces. So dipole-dipole forces occur between the molecules with permanent dipoles. That is the molecules which are polar in nature. They can exert a dipole-dipole forces amongst each other. Okay, let's see an example. So let's start with an example. This is the molecular structure of propane. Propane has a 3-carbon chain, and this is the molecular structure, and similarly we can compare it with acetaldehyde. So acetaldehyde, the structure is like this. It is a 2-carbon, but it has a also oxygen within it. Okay, and interestingly that the molar mass of propane and acetaldehyde is both have the similar molar mass, that is 44.1 gram per mole. Now moments before we discussed that if the molecule has greater molar mass or higher surface area, it will have higher induced dipole and hence stronger London dispersion force, which in turn results in higher boiling point. So now based on that particular learning, we should conclude that yes, here both of these molecules should have similar boiling point because both have same molar mass, so the number of electrons also should be the same, and also it has similar surface area, that is both are more or less similar elongated. So based on that particular learning or that particular knowledge, we should conclude that yes, both should have similar London dispersion forces and hence they should have the similar boiling point. But that's not the case. So pause the video and think which of the molecules have higher boiling point. So actually boiling point, we know that it's the energy you need to put into the system in order to break the intermolecular forces so that the molecules overcome the intermolecular forces and break free and enter the gaseous state. And the boiling point of the acetaldehyde is 20 degrees Celsius, whereas that of the propane is minus 42.1 degrees Celsius. So we see that the acetaldehyde has higher boiling point. And what makes the difference? Think about that. What makes the difference? Why we need more energy to overcome the intermolecular forces in liquid acetaldehyde molecules? So we need to think of something which acts over and above the London dispersion forces. The London dispersion forces are already there, so every molecules have. But what is acting over and above the London dispersion forces? We need to think of that particular aspect. So London dispersion forces is about temporary dipole, inducing temporary dipole to the neighboring molecules. Now we are going to talk about permanent dipoles. So now compare these two molecules and think about which of the following would have a stronger permanent dipole. Now, the molecular dipole moment are just the vector sums of the dipole moments of individual bonds. So it's actually the quantity that describes the two opposite charges. So for example, we can take a hydrogen and a chlorine, and there is a bond between that. So the chlorine atom has a higher tendency to attract whatever electron is shared between here. So hydrogen and chlorine share the electrons here, and here whatever sharing is more contributed by or more done by chlorine. The electrons are more attracted towards the chlorine because the chlorine has a stronger electronegativity. This is just a property of every atoms have, that every atoms attract electrons at a different rates. So here some atoms have higher electronegativity than the others. So if you compare here hydrogen and chlorine, chlorine has higher electronegativity. That means that the chlorine has a higher tendency to attract the electrons towards itself, and hence it's attracting more electrons towards itself. There is a formation of delta minus charge across it, and there is a formation of delta plus charge across the hydrogen atom, and hence we can represent the direction of the dipole moment as from hydrogen towards chlorine. So this part is a positive charge and this part is the negative moment. Okay. Now think about this one. So if this is this is a propane. So carbon and hydrogen have also different tendency to attract electrons, right? So carbon is more electronegative here. So carbon has a tendency to attract electrons towards itself. So we can see the direction of the dipole moment from hydrogen to carbon. So similarly, this one is like this, and this hydrogen, we can similarly say that the dipole moment will be towards the carbon atom. And if you can see the net dipole moment of the acetaldehyde will be like this, that since it has also carbon hydrogen atoms, and carbon and hydrogens are of different electronegativity, there will be no dipole moment across the carbon-carbon bond because both are same or similar, right? But here you can see there is an oxygen atom also as well, and oxygen has a higher, very high electronegativity. It has a higher tendency to attract electrons towards itself as compared to hydrogen or carbon. So it has a very strong dipole moment as compared to the CH bonds. Okay, so what happens here is that the contribution of the higher dipole moment takes place in acetaldehyde because of only one oxygen atom, and hence the significant dipole moment is there present in the acetaldehyde molecules, and the net dipole moment we can say here like this. So therefore there is results in the formation of delta minus charge across the oxygen, and here across the delta plus charge across the other parts of the atom. So it is a permanent dipole. It is different from the London dispersion forces. So when we say about the dipole-dipole forces, we refer to a permanent dipole being attracted to another permanent dipole. So acetaldehyde is facing that attraction on the top of the London dispersion forces, and hence it has the higher boiling point because the intermolecular forces are more because of the permanent dipole. Okay, so yes, this is the conclusion, that hence why acetaldehyde have a higher boiling point as compared to the propane. So hopefully you have understood what is the difference between the dipole-dipole interactions and London dispersion forces. So both have the first one, London dispersion forces, are the temporary dipoles inducing dipoles towards the neighboring each other. But in this case, if we see a polar molecule like the oxygen or chlorine, then we can expect the dipole-dipole interactions because it will be permanent in nature and it has higher tendency of attracting the electrons towards itself. So it's a permanent dipole. Yes. And to conclude, that acetaldehyde have a stronger intermolecular forces because of course the permanent intermolecular forces is stronger as compared to the temporary intermolecular forces. On the other hand, the propane had only the London dispersion forces, and acetaldehyde has London dispersion forces along with the dipole-dipole interactions, right? And hence it has the higher boiling point. Now, the third thing that we'll learn is about the hydrogen bond. Hydrogen bond is a special type of dipole-dipole interaction. It is an extension to it, and that occurs when between the highly electronegative, like nitrogen, oxygen, or fluorine atom, and the hydrogen atom. So we'll see an example here. So you see here, I have three different types of molecules. Here I have the hydrogen fluoride, and here it is the ammonia, and here it is the water. So fluorine is bonded, the green colored atom is the fluorine, which is bonded to one hydrogen atom. In the second, I have ammonia, where I have one nitrogen bonded with three hydrogen atoms. And the third, I have a water, where one oxygen is bonded with two hydrogen atoms. And what we have these molecules to do with hydrogen bonds? So simple answer is that each one of these cases, we have hydrogen bonded to a much more electronegative atoms. Here the electronegative atom is fluorine. In this second case, it is the nitrogen, and in the third case, it is the oxygen. So the electrons are going to spend more time on the electronegative atoms as compared to the less electronegative atom like hydrogen. So let's see this example. So this is the structure of the ammonia. You can see nitrogen and bonded with three atoms of hydrogen, and nitrogen is more electronegative than hydrogen, right? And so what we can expect that nitrogen exerts a permanent dipole towards itself and creating a delta minus charge on the top of nitrogen atom and a delta plus charge across the three hydrogen atoms, right? Similarly, it is the case for other ammonia molecules as well. So what happens is that there is a bond formation between the nitrogen, which has the delta minus charge, and the hydrogen of the other ammonia molecule. So this bond, we call it as hydrogen bond. We can see this example. For example, the oxygen also have a shared electron. It is attracted towards oxygen, right? And hence, oxygen develops a delta minus charge on itself, and delta plus charge is created across the hydrogen. And because of this, the oxygen delta minus charge is attracted to the delta plus charge of the other hydrogen atom. And this bond, whatever is formed between the two water molecules, we call it as hydrogen bond. Similarly, if you can see, it is the hydrogen and fluorine atom, and fluorine is more electronegative, so the electrons will be more attracted towards fluorine. Delta minus charge will be developed across fluorine, and delta plus charge will be developed across hydrogen, and hence there is a bond formation between the opposite charges, of course, because we know that the like charges repel and opposite charges attract, and this bond we call it as hydrogen bond. So hydrogen bonds add on to the London dispersion forces and hence causes a higher boiling point. So if we see here that for example we have a hydrogen along with an electronegative atom, of course it can have a hydrogen bond over and above the London dispersion forces, so it will have a higher boiling point. And hydrogen bonds, are everywhere. Even you have a lot of hydrogen bonds. For example, hydrogen bonds are there in the base pairs of the DNA molecule. So if you see, it is a DNA molecule, and DNA molecule have 4 nucleic acids. And that is, the names are adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And adenine makes a double bond with thymine always, and these 2 double bonds are the hydrogen bonds. So you can see here nitrogen is there, hydrogen is there, and oxygen is there. So between hydrogen and oxygen there is a hydrogen bond. Similarly here between nitrogen and hydrogen there is a hydrogen bond. So there are 2 hydrogen bonds between adenine and thymine, and there are 3 hydrogen bonds between guanine and cytosine. So you can imagine that there are a lot of hydrogen bonds right now in your body, right? Because we have a lot of DNA molecules within our cells, and we have a lot of water molecules as well as in our cells. So right now you have a lot of hydrogen bonds in your body. Even proteins, we have a hydrogen bonds, which gives a structure to the protein molecule. So to conclude, We have seen the particulate states of matter, right? So based on the particulate state of matter, we can classify the intermolecular forces of attraction, and the various categories are crystalline and amorphous solids. So this is crystalline and amorphous solid, this is liquids, and this is gas. The second thing that we have learned is about London dispersion forces, which are proportional to the polarizability of a molecule, which is proportional to the molecular or atomic size. So higher the atomic size, more is the number of electrons, and higher the polarizability, and more is the stronger London dispersion forces. But we have to remember that this is the temporary forces. It is not so strong as compared to the other one. The third force that we have learned is about dipole-dipole forces, which is defined as the force of attraction between the oppositely charged ends of polar molecules. So if we have a polar molecule like oxygen or nitrogen, then of course we can imagine that there is an above the London dispersion force. We have dipole-dipole forces, right? And the bond formation always takes place between opposite charges. Hydrogen bond, the third thing we have learned about is that the hydrogen bond is formed through dipole-dipole interaction. It is only an extension between the hydrogen and highly electronegative atom. So in the next class, we will learn about the mixtures and solutions and the various categories of separation of mixtures. I hope that you have understood this class, and based on the above concepts we have learned, you can answer the following question and give your answer in the comments below. Thank you for watching.